Howdy there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And today I'm going to be making some mock-ups inspired by Cowboy Bebop to explore what it might look like as a pixel art game. I'm not breaking any new ground by saying this, but this series has just got the perfect blend of sci-fi western aesthetic, comedy, drama, and one of the most incredible and eclectic soundtracks you'll ever hear. So there's a lot to be inspired by. And to do a thorough job on the pixel art adaptation, I'm going to create a unique piece for each member of the main cast. So without further ado, let's jam. Alright, to get started, I've decided to work with a canvas size of 160 by 144 pixels. This is the same resolution as the Game Boy and Game Gear handheld consoles, and I usually find something in this range to be a really reliable go-to for me, because there's sort of an efficiency in creating work within this small space. And also the restriction here kind of forces your hand into creating something really stylized and noticeably pixely. The mock-up that I'm making for Spike is going to be set up kind of like a battle in an RPG, with the characters taking up the top part of the frame, and then the lower area being for the battle commands. And I'm creating his character sprite first here so that I know that I'm happy with the appearance and scale before sizing all those additional elements and details to that sprite size. The other restriction I'm using for this series of mockups is that they're going to be limited to only 8 colors. And I've prepared a series of unique color palettes ahead of time which are inspired by each of the main characters. So for instance, with Spike's palette here, I've represented the blues and yellows of his outfit to be 3 of the 8 colors in the palette. He's also got a subtle green tint to his hair, so I've assigned 1 for that as well. And then there's also a red as just a nod to the color of his ship, but I also figured that it'd work well as a contrasting color for the environment. The fight that I'm staging here is based on the episode featuring the character Mad Perot, who's this really creepy but whimsical assassin, and Spike ends up facing off with him in a space-themed amusement park. Even for the wide variety of situations that the main characters find themselves in across the series, this is one of those settings and villains that's just so over the top and spectacular that I felt it'd be something that would lend itself quite well to a stylized and cartoony pixel art appearance. So you can see here I'm working my way through the Spaceland visuals, trying to find ways to represent some of the things that we see within the episode as backdrop for the battle. One of the challenges when putting this palette together was just the way that these limited colors, which were derived from the character colors, could also substitute for a multicolor backdrop of a theme park. And I think what helped in this case was just ensuring that I used a low to moderate saturation in these color selections. And that way it's a lot easier to stick totally different hues next to each other and have them complement one another rather than compete. Now, when it came to the sprite work for Mad Perot himself, he's got this really balloon-like body, or rather his coat is at least. So I figured the best thing to do is just to start from that silhouette and then kind of keep throwing detail onto that and carving away to find the character. Also, when he first appears in this scene, he's standing on top of this giant hippo statue, which I definitely considered trying to find a way to fit it within the frame. Like maybe just the top of the statue underneath him or something like that. But I think that's really the kind of thing where that may be better suited as kind of like a cutscene, and then it drop you into the fight and he's kind of right here like we see him. Still, I adapted the pose that he's in based on how he's firing at Spike from up on that statue, just to give him some of the characterization from that moment. I had saved a bit of space along the top here, and I used this to create a small name and health bar, which was nice because there's a lot more space here than actually trying to fit this information above the character itself and kind of covering up the background, right? And then similarly for Spike, I've got this wide bar along the bottom of the screen, so I can fit a character portrait and some battle commands. The portrait here is made within a spacing of 24 by 32 pixels, and I kept building out and iterating the line work, but also a lot of this was just experimenting with the right balance of rendering to try to capture the animated appearance. Getting the eyes right is always one of the trickier things at these lower resolutions, and the palette didn't actually leave room for a color lighter than the skin tone to use within the eyes. So it was a bit of searching for just whatever the best option was here. Anyway, we're getting to the end here, so let's take a look at the finalized battle concept for Spike. For Jet's mockup, I wanted to explore a top-down overworld style perspective aboard the ship. Specifically, we see him on several occasions in the series cooking, and food, or lack thereof, is a recurring theme within the show. So if this were an RPG, I thought it'd be fun that he could have ingredients and recipes in order to make consumables for the crew. To get started, I'm creating the entrance to the room where he cooks. I'm not even sure to call it the kitchen, to be honest, but it's down one of the main corridors, and there's this large circular opening into it. Once again, the palette here is inspired by Jet's costume, and I've extrapolated the blue of his jumpsuit into a series of 3 tones that can be used to detail the walls and floors of the room. While this isn't exactly the color scheme of the interior of the Bebop, not this particular hall anyway, my plan was that these colors suit the dim look inside the room, and then that frees up the remaining colors of the palette for Jet so that he'll stand out within the scene. The trickiest part of this earlier phase was just making sure that I had proper reference for the layout here. I'm not sure that we ever see like a super clear and wide shot of Jet cooking, because it's more about those dramatic close-ups, as it very well should be. So I got kind of obsessed trying to piece together what the layout of this room is exactly. Luckily, there are a couple times where we can catch Ed in here, and there's a great wide shot that shows the cooking space with the burners there, so this is one of my main references for detailing the interior. So I'm continuing to translate a lot of these objects and details primarily using these 3 blue tones and the black, and the other colors work well for highlights or pops of color to make certain objects more noticeable, like the cooking station. For Jet's sprite, I started with a sizing of 16 pixels and then painted in the details on kind of a forward-facing appearance. This one ended up coming out nicely, but it's not exactly engaged in cooking, so I ended up taking it and trying to explore a side-facing sprite. But in the end, I like the recognizability of him sort of looking at the camera, so it ended up being sort of a front-facing but sideways gesture, just so we can see enough of his features, but that he's actually engaged in cooking. That being said, I did eventually give him his cooking sunglasses anyway, but it's nice to have a few of those sprite variants on hand at least. Alright, so all that work is kind of on the left side of the canvas, and I had left this large column along the right half of the screen to add in a sort of character info card. Just something that'll represent a character menu or status screen kind of idea. And we can see here, I've made him level 4 at the moment, which I also eventually added a bunch of recipes to his known skills. So that may track with him actually deserving to be a higher level than this. But, I haven't really sat down to work out the finer details of the skill tree quite yet, so just take everything with a grain of salt for now. Once again, I've created his portrait within a space of 24 by 32, just like Spike's. Actually, to be specific, this one and I think Spike's are actually 23 by 32 because I wanted there to be this middle column of pixels so that things could have that center pixel, for the point of his beard on the chin there. I also tried to do just a touch more of subtle styling to these menu elements. And one of the last things that I did was also add in a few items just as additional references to the character. So with that, let's take a look at the finalized artwork for Jet at his cooking station. Another strong element to the show is that there's a lot of time spent in spaceships, either traveling between areas or chasing down bounties. For Faye's artwork, I wanted to explore a mock-up where she's in her ship, seeing a bit of action like this. And so this one takes a bit of a departure from the sort of RPG format that's been building from the last 2 mock-ups, in the sense that it ends up being more heavily inspired by something like a side-scroller shoot-'em-up game. That being said, I think that'd actually be awesome to see something like this exist within a typical RPG format, maybe as a mini-game or like an alternative battle structure for ship combat specifically. Another format that I considered for something like this would be sort of like a turn-based tactical RPG for ship combat. But in the end, I went with the side-scroller idea since I felt to do a better job at capturing more energy to the scene. Just like with the mock-up for Spike, I've created Faye's ship first since it'll be the defining element for the sizing and the composition here. There are also a lot of great ship moments to select from throughout the series, and I've decided to base my mock-up on a scene from the Jamming with Edward episode, where they're chasing down a rogue satellite and have to navigate their way through an entire field of laser fire from these other defending satellites. Faye's role within this moment is to act as a decoy and basically bait all these attacking satellites in order for Spike to get close to their target. So it really felt like the kind of thing that was well suited for translating into gameplay, specifically one where you need to maneuver around laser fire and debris while also shooting down all these little satellites. Carrying on the 8-color palette idea, I've extrapolated the purple highlight of Faye's hair into a series of purpley gray tones that could be repurposed across her ship and within the space backdrop. And then there's also the red and yellow of her outfit, which worked well for other elements like the satellites and laser fire. Along the top, I've left a 32 pixel tall black bar across the canvas to create a HUD. And this becomes a different form factor for portraits and other elements than what was seen in the previous two artworks, but that works out okay because it just kind of mixes it up a little bit for my own amusement too. These two icons here on the HUD represent meters for her attacks, like maybe there's kind of a standard firing with cooldown, and then perhaps a stronger missile attack, which I imagine would be more discrete and finite quantities. With the remaining space along the HUD, I've brought in some inspiration from the visuals we see on her dashboard to create the suggestion of a small map, or more of a radar actually, which this worked out as a nice way to also show that Spike's in the area too in his ship. And then finally, I had a bit of leftover space, so I'm adding in some dialogue from the show, basically where Edward volunteers Faye to be the decoy. So I picture it to be the kind of thing where this is where you can see messages from the radio chatter here. And then I'm going to finish this off by giving Faye her reply to that suggestion, just kind of placing that over her ship in sort of this comic book style bubble. So let's go ahead and take a look at the final piece. Alright, with the final mock-up, we're returning to the top-down overworld style look, because I want to recreate something from one of my favorite Edward and Ein moments, which is basically the entirety of the Mushroom Samba episode, is like my favorite moments of them. But for this scene in particular, the two of them are wandering through a desert looking for food, and they come upon a truck on the side of the road selling watermelon, but don't have any money to buy any. The reason I chose this scene was just because that idea of wandering translates really well to exploration in an RPG. And then of course, it's just sort of relatable, you know, sometimes coming upon some useful wares, but not having the coin to purchase them. Just like with the mock-up for Jet, the sprite work here is around that 16 pixel height, give or take. And then for Ein, I tried to find something that felt reasonably in scale while still being recognizable. Surprisingly, the most technically challenging piece of this mock-up, maybe even of the entire project, I'm not sure, was just working out the structure of this watermelon truck here. It's the kind of thing that sort of seems harmless before you start. You know, just like, oh yeah, I'll do the scene and then I'll just kind of quickly throw a simple truck in there, it'll be all good. But the thing that makes it challenging is just translating that exact architecture into the top-down perspective. You know, it's got a few different levels and edges, and then it has to be something that's recognizable and looks like you could interact with it also. Originally, I wanted to have the dude kind of poking his head out a little bit too, but I already had to exaggerate the back end there so that there was room for the watermelons on display, so I just kind of left it like that. On the flip side of that though, in the category of things that I didn't expect to be surprised by but was, I was really happy with how the small watermelon sprite came out here. And once I had that singular sprite, I was able to copy it out and fill out the rest of the truck. For the color palette, the orange, green, and purple come from Edward's look, and then the brown is in there for Ein. I've added in a gray-blue because I knew it would be useful for the environment, like for the color of the truck and the road, but it also works as a nice shade tone for the green. Once again, I've used kind of a moderate saturation for everything, and that really helped to give it this sort of worn or dusty vibe to suit the desert aesthetic. To fill out the environment, what I'm doing here is just creating a bunch of isolated assets. And then eventually what I did was replicate those out across the map to fill it out. Most of this is pretty standard desert highway decor, but I was also looking across a few reference images to sort of bring in the kinds of things that we can see within the scene of the anime itself. Lastly, I'm creating a small 16 pixel tall HUD along the top for the character info. This is the same sizing that was used in the enemy HUD of Spike's mockup, and I really liked how efficient it could be with that spacing, so I wanted to try it out for the player characters in this context as well and just kind of see how it looks. So with that, let's take a look at the finalized artwork for Edward and I. Alright, and here's all that artwork all together. Overall, this was really fun to explore a few different configurations and form factors of this general idea. This is mainly approached from a sort of whatever happens happens mentality for each individual mockup, but I think there's kind of a nice loose cohesion across the collection here. So let's go ahead now and close this out with CRT Time. Probably our first ever quadruple CRT Time, I suppose. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.